Understanding CBT can be very overwhelming. When do you use acceptance and commitment therapy? When do you use DBT, schema therapy? Each application has a very special purpose. And once you understand this, you will see how they fit together. Welcome to The Art of Therapy, Season 3, Episode 15.
It's such a wonderful experience unpacking the art of therapy with you. Yes.
I appreciate that. For me, very meaningful.
And I think just to go back, so we really started to explore cognitive behavior therapy in this last couple of episodes. And in our last episode specifically, then really started to look at acceptance and commitments therapy and what the development that was as well in really changing or moving the focus from trying to change the thought to changing the relationship to the thoughts. And with that, it opened up so many possibilities. And really assisting someone to learn how to change the way they relate to the stress, and then also mobilizing them to what is meaningful and what is of value to them.
Yeah, what a development. And you've set it out so clearly. And that change from trying to correct or change or modify a thought to change the relationship to the thought. Wow. And the kind of flexibility that brings, and the possibility for support and change. What a development.
What a development, yes. And we know, like we said the last time, there's even more developments on top of that. So we started saying we're exploring the third wave of CBT. So really looking forward to exploring that further with you today and looking more into that.
Right. Shall we go there?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
Let's jump in.
All right, so let's look at the next major development. Once ACT had introduced or really built out this idea in CBT about changing the relationship to thought, of course that would bring with it a host of other developments as part of the third wave. And one of the key developments is dialectical behavior therapy, that Marsha Linehan, that her contribution here is really significant, because what she really put the focus on is understanding the problem of emotional dysregulation. And what she identified in her work was that when someone is really emotionally overwhelmed, where they are very and highly reactive or impulsive, what she discovered is that often cognitive work may not land because someone is overwhelmed and there's a very high emotional dysregulation. So what she was able to do is to consider then how does one then deal with this? And she effectively drew on the dialectical approach, which is a reasoning approach, a philosophical approach that explores truth by holding two contrary or opposing ideas at once. And what she considered here was that in order for someone to change, for change to occur, there must be two elements. There has to be both acceptance and change at the same time, not one or the other, both. Both have to occur simultaneously. And so, for instance, I have to, on the one hand, accept myself, not overly judge, but just accept that I'm imperfect, that I make mistakes, an acceptance of myself, and at the same time that I need to improve, I need to develop. And so it's holding these two constructs simultaneously. And that formed part of the basis for dialectical behavior therapy or DBT.
I think with that, what you mentioned is holding it both at the same time. It's not the one or the other one. It's both at the same time. And when we can do that, then it creates so much flexibility and so much space to work in, actually.
It does, yes. And that's why once she had put forward this thinking, it becomes very, very practical, because what does one do then when a client is overwhelmed? The goal is to actually bring about stabilization. And so instead of moving for any kind of cognitive work, the first step is stabilize. And then once there's stabilization, then later move to the CBT. Well, it is all part of CBT, but it's then moved to the cognitive work. And it's just so practical, because if you've ever worked with someone who's really distressed, which I know you have many times, but if just that experience where someone is so overwhelmed emotionally, they can't process and work with cognitive and thought constructs. And so here we have in DBT something that's enormously practical.
That stabilization first, it makes me think just of a child that's in the midst of a meltdown. You can't reason with them. You can't go to the cognition side.
Yes.
And it's different, but it's the same process. Is that we first need to stabilize, and then once that happens, then we can move to the cognitive side.
You have so much. We readily accept it in children.
Yes.
that one cannot reason in that moment. But somehow we apply a different sort of norm for ourselves as adults.
Yes.
That no, we can be distressed but move and work with thoughts now. So the beauty here with DBT is just how clear it is. And what she had done is really outline very practically some skills. And so the first one, in a situation to bring about stability, distress tolerance. And really that indicates that, of course, one wants to resolve or take away discomfort or pain in a situation, but sometimes we can't. Sometimes we've just got to find a way through it. We've got to tolerate it. And so distress tolerance. And there are so many different applications, but one of the well-known ones, of course, is the cold water reset, where just if one is really distressed emotionally, putting and splashing some cold water on one's face, that can immediately bring about a shift. Or placing some cold packs, ice packs, and just that sensation shift can bring about moving into a parasympathetic state and a state of calm and more calm. It's beautiful work, and it's just, that's why this part of CBT and DBT here is so practical, because it just shows work with physiology first when there's emotional dysregulation. Very practical.
And that actually, it makes it so accessible and then understandable, which really helps in the therapeutic process.
It does. Yeah.
So once we have that stability from a DBT perspective, what is the next thing then? What do we work on then?
Well, there are skills around assisting with emotional regulation itself. And here, something that is well known and we utilize is, of course, it's very practical and it's action-based. So part of emotional regulation is understanding that tendency towards something. I want to isolate myself. I want to avoid. But of course, here we've got in DBT the skill that one could apply there for more regulation or to assist with regulation is opposite action. So if I'm going to isolate myself or have that sense, just do one small thing that's the opposite, which is something like sending a message. So not something that's overwhelming, just something that's manageable. Or if I'm going to avoid, that sense of avoidance, stay in the situation for just 2 minutes longer. This is where it becomes so practical. And when one is feeling really balanced, one can't immediately see the benefit, but when you are distressed and you feel overwhelmed, wow, when you work with something practical like this, can bring a lot of relief.
It makes it doable. As soon as it's practical, it feels much more doable.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So we have there emotion regulation. The third skill often referred to, and certainly one she identified, is interpersonal effectiveness. And the moment that one can do something that's going to be interpersonally effective, that can make such a difference. So the one clear ask, it's so practical, just asking one thing, not talking about what one doesn't want, blaming or anything like that. No, one clear ask. And again, it's so practical because, yes, this is drawing on assertiveness. And assertiveness, as we know, is a remarkable skill, but it's much more comprehensive to teach and for someone to learn. And so it has its place, a really significant place. But what do you do practically? And someone can hold that one clear ask. And that can make a difference with, say, interpersonal effectiveness.
And again, it's something that's not overwhelming. It's just one thing, and it's one clear ask. And that makes it so doable.
Exactly. It's so clear, so tangible and doable. Yeah.
DBT, it does so much, it gives so much empowerment to clients and being able to do things with it.
Yes, it does. And that's hence its appeal, because it is so practical, it's action-based, and it's not overwhelming. And as soon as the therapist understands which skill would be most effective, can actually be very easily trained. The other one, of course, just to complete it, is the mindfulness. And mindfulness is a whole thing in and of itself. But how can one train someone or teach them just to become mindful in the moment? And we know, for instance, the name 5 things. What a technique. So, for instance, you would just teach the client here, name 5 things that they can see, 4 things, for instance, that they're feeling, 3 things that they hear, 2 things that they can actually either smell, and 1 thing that they can taste. One can just see how it's so practical, and it takes, because we're often visually looking, scanning for threat, very overwhelmed. But as we start to narrow this in from 5 things that we see, 4 things we're feeling, 3 things we're hearing, going inward, 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 and becoming more mindful. It's such a practical way of bringing about emotional regulation and coping with that when one's feeling very overwhelmed.
It's the practical nature of this, and just as you go through that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's so grounding, just in the moment as well. Actually,
Yes,
just thinking of it.
It is, so grounding.
And that's also a big part of this, the CBT developments, is the mindfulness side and really understanding that.
Yes. So as soon as one can see then the place of DBT as another development, and that was really in the early 1990s with Linehan. But of course, there's going to be so much more that then adds and consolidates. And so the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, just in itself really focused on mindfulness. And that really has a very, very special place because what it's looking at is rumination. Segal and Williams and Teasdale wanted to look at one very specific aspect or process, and that is the process of rumination, where there's a repetitive or looped thought, which is in its process it actually drives depression. And so they wanted to just focus on this. And what is the goal there? What is the therapeutic healing there or relief? And it's really decentering, the principle of decentering, where the therapist now is going to teach the client that a thought is it's a mental event. It's not a truth.
Okay.
And the moment client begins to get this distinction, that means then that they can more easily learn to notice a thought and then, of course, return to present moment awareness. And that's really something.
Psychotherapy is not only a profession, it's a state of being. And for that, it requires continuous learning, training, and refining your skills. If you would like to become better in your role as a psychotherapist, come and join Dr. Warwick Phipps for in-person training at Treatment Work Centre, where you will experience training like never before from a thought leader and expert in psychotherapy. If you would like some more information on our training or to book a training session, please visit the link in the description. And also, if you find these podcast episodes meaningful, please subscribe to The Art of Therapy. It takes the power of the thought away, that it's just a thought, it's just
Yes.
a mental event.
Yes.
And then they can be present again, which it changes that loop of that rumination again.
Yeah, because the moment you can do that, you can identify it or notice it. So, for example, what thought am I having? I'm having a planning thought. It doesn't define me.
Yes.
Or I'm having a worry thought. None of these thoughts then, once you begin to note, and they don't define you. Even if I'm being critical of myself, well, I'm having a self-criticism thought. Somehow each time, just to be able to identify it, note the thought, and then return to present moment awareness. What a relief. Yeah.
It really is a relief, and it creates opportunity to be able to be in the here and now and to interact with the here and now.
Exactly. And it is very practical, because where we see with DBT is immediately to stabilize when someone's emotionally overwhelmed before cognitive work. What we see with MBCT is very specific application where someone is tending to really overthink something, that rumination, and we'll just guide them there to stop analyzing that thought, because it's that analyzing that is going to be counterproductive, and then moving for that process of just present moment awareness through just identifying or commenting on the thought, and then returning to present moment. And that can just break remarkably that rumination cycle that really does very often drive depression. And again, very practical.
Very practical. Yeah, it's they all just fit together so beautifully. The CBT with the DBT, and then the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy.
Yeah, it's as if we've just seen in the field of CBT just this explosion of thinking. One can also add what would be considered just so important as another part of the third wave, and really is the schema therapy. And Jeffrey Young with schema therapy really looked at in the 90s what happens when we've got this a deep repetitive thought pattern that's coming up across someone's lifespan or across multiple relationships over time or situations. What was identified is this is not just simply a thought. It's an emotionally activated schema, very deep belief that often relates to unmet needs, but specifically unmet needs that occurred very early in someone's life. And once one can see this recurring pattern, the question is then, well, how can one intervene with schema work? And Jeffrey Young here was, again, very, very practical in beginning to look at, well, what about if we can conceptualize this as different modes? Because a mode doesn't define us. It's just something that we're in. So it's a mode or a part of us. And helping the client to identify that mode and then understand what's the need associated with that mode, and then most importantly, helping the client to relate or behave in a different way. It's going to be more helpful. So it's really practical schema work. And so one, for instance, will say and help a client identify, what mode am I in, which may be in, say, an avoidant mode. Or perhaps identify I'm in an overcompensating mode. Anytime I can just begin to identify what kind of mode I'm in and begin to explore, well, and understand what is the need associated with that. And then how could I respond or relate in a different way that's going to be more effective. Can be incredibly empowering.
It's understanding it's a mode. It's just a mode. It's not who we are. It's a mode.
Yes.
And understanding that there's behind this mode there's a need.
Yes.
Unmet need.
Yes.
But then also the next step is how to behave in a different way. That's more effective and can to help facilitate in meeting that need. Actually.
Very much. And we know that this kind of work, as with really all meaningful therapy, requires very high level of awareness, astuteness, and precision by the therapist, often to understand, both identify and understand these deeper patterns. Because very often we don't always know what some of our own deep beliefs, these schemas, these inner beliefs are. We've acquired them in early age, and we constantly, we may be in a mode, but not, well, we are certainly, but just don't recognize it. But once a therapist is really perceptive and knows what to look for when they train in schema work as part of CBT, then of course, the moment it's brought into the client's awareness, now they too can begin to see it and identify that pattern and the need associated with, and then do it differently.
There's so much power in this work and being able to identify it, and it's so accurate, and then there can be a change to it.
Yes.
It really is. It brings so much empowerment to our clients.
That's it. What's so exciting about the kind of empowerment that it can bring about is because really what we're looking at is at this level of CBT and the incorporation of third wave. What we're looking at is a series of lenses as part of CBT, because CBT really evolved from a model that was initially orientated around changing and correcting thoughts to more of a system of understanding some of the processes that maintain someone's distress. And so, wow, once you really get CBT, you can look and understand how things fit together. You know, for instance, we can look at second wave. We know that second wave CBT is going to be associated with very high degree of precision. The moment one is utilizing ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, we just know that that is going to incorporate a degree of flexibility. We look at DBT, we know motion, that's going to go immediately for regulation. We look at MBCT, and that just we can anticipate. We know it now. It's going to be control over awareness. And schema therapy, we're looking at depth. Wow, you start bringing together this understanding. It can be profound because, for instance, if someone is encountering a difficulty with avoidance, it may be that when avoidance is maintaining the problem, one can begin to now think of some of the second wave CBT. Yeah. So one sees that if someone is really entangled, fused with their thoughts, we can anticipate ACT as some possible part of that intervention. When someone's completely overwhelmed, we've got some sense there. Let's regulate first. So let's utilize DBT. When it's that rumination and continued thought pattern, it's just looping round and round, very unproductive, but actually driving, lowering mood, depression. We know the place of MBCT. And where we see that sort of deep pattern that's repeated through someone's life or over relationships, we can anticipate that working with schema therapy. So it's just so exciting that once you can start to see how everything fits together. And here at this level of CBT, it's no longer one aspect of the theory or one approach. Your really high-level practitioners who incorporate CBT as part of their psychotherapy are really looking at, given the presenting problem, what's maintaining it, and which aspect and model of and development of CBT will suit this client in this moment to bring about the greatest relief. And in that sense, what one is seeing is an integrative approach. Of course, this is integrative at the level of CBT, and there's ways of integrating that we'll be exploring other modalities, but this one just has to sort of recognize the proficiency and how effective CBT can really be. And again, why its appeal.
It really is. It's the start of the integrative way of dealing with clients and helping clients.
Yes.
And that is exciting. And it's every time you understand a different lens, you add it. And that creates, it just creates so much more opportunity, so much more ability to help.
Very much. Therapies and being able to facilitate therapy is so fulfilling. It can be deeply rewarding and meaningful, because to be able to help someone overcome their distress, their pain, their suffering is what a privilege. Something that's deeply meaningful to be able to be part of.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think looking at just exploring CBT and all of the different ways that forms part of that, it's so meaningful. But I'm just very mindful that there's so much more.
Yes.
And maybe if we pause here now, but then that we move on to one of the different approaches and of systems theory, and that we go into depth of that the next time.
Yes, I'm glad you've noted that, because the systems approach is a development in parallel. As CBT was developing, we saw and we spoke about some of the developments in the 50s and 60s that led to second wave, and then into the 90s and early 2000s. And today we see the continued development of CBT. But parallel to that development in the 90s, 50s, of course, is systems theory and the systems approach. And where many approaches were beginning to conceptualize causality as one thing causing another, systems looks at it at a very different way. When we look and we understand that how something behaves on its own to how it behaves with another together, we have an altogether different observation of that phenomenon. Wow. And so we know we're going into exciting areas.
Really looking forward to that and exploring it with you further.
I share that.
Thank you for joining us on The Art of Therapy. If you found this episode meaningful, or if it expanded your knowledge, we would love to hear from you in the comment section. We are looking forward to continuing this journey with you. Until our next episode.